I was staring at my computer monitor when the announcement came through. Isabel Kerrigan, our 23-year-old summer intern who'd been with the company for exactly 11 weeks, was receiving the quarterly performance bonus. My quarterly performance bonus, $72,000 that should have been mine after I'd shattered every sales target they'd set for me this year. The conference room felt suffocating as Division Head Gregory Thurston explained how Isabel had shown exceptional promise and innovative thinking that deserved immediate recognition. I watched her sit there, hands folded, looking genuinely surprised but pleased. She had no idea what was happening. None of us did, really, except for Gregory. I'd worked at this major technology consulting firm for 4 years. 4 years of staying late, taking weekend calls from frantic clients, and turning around impossible projects that nobody else wanted to touch. I'd brought in 6 new enterprise accounts this quarter alone, each worth more than Isabel made in a year. The bonus was supposed to be automatic for anyone who exceeded their annual targets by more than 30%. I'd exceeded mine by 68%. But there I sat, watching someone else collect my reward, while Gregory painted this picture of meritocracy and fresh perspectives. The worst part wasn't even the money, though $72,000 would have meant finally paying off my student loans and maybe taking my first real vacation in 3 years. The worst part was how carefully orchestrated this felt, how prepared Gregory seemed with his explanations about investing in tomorrow's leaders. After the meeting, I lingered near the elevator bank. Isabel approached me with genuine concern written across her face. "Celine, I hope you know I had no idea about any of this," she said quietly. "I feel terrible that you didn't get recognized too. You've been so generous with your time, teaching me everything." I looked at her earnest expression and felt something shift inside me. She really didn't know. She wasn't part of some conspiracy. She was just a young woman who'd gotten caught up in something much bigger than herself. "Congratulations, Isabel," I told her, meaning it more than she could have understood. "You absolutely deserve recognition for your hard work." That evening, I did something I rarely do anymore. I called my sister Erin. "They gave away your bonus?" Erin's voice crackled through the speaker as I paced around my apartment. "Celine, that's insane. Can't you file a complaint with HR?" "It's more complicated than that," I said, staring out at the city skyline. "I think I know why this happened." During my first week training Isabel, she'd mentioned growing up in Millbrook Falls, population 8,000. It struck me as an unusual place to be from, so remote that I'd never heard of it. Then, 2 weeks ago, I'd overheard Gregory on a personal call talking about visiting his mother in Millbrook Falls for her birthday. Same tiny town, same impossible coincidence. I'd started paying attention after that. Gregory and Isabel had a familiarity that went beyond professional mentorship. They shared inside jokes about local restaurants and knew the same handful of families. When I casually asked Isabel about her hometown connections, she mentioned that her family had known the Thurston family forever, Gregory's family. The bonus wasn't about performance metrics or innovation. It was about hometown loyalty wrapped up in corporate language. Before I dive deeper into what happened next, could you please take a few seconds to tell me in the comments where you're listening from? Because I want to know where my story is, reaching people who understand what it feels like to work so hard only to watch connections matter more than competence. And please like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification because this story gets so much more intense, and I promise you've never heard anything like what I did next. The thing about discovering favoritism is that it changes how you see everything. Every interaction, every decision, every casual conversation suddenly has layers you missed before. I spent the next few days watching Gregory and Isabel together, and the patterns became impossible to ignore. He gave her the easiest client accounts to manage. He praised her for suggestions that other team members had made weeks earlier. He shielded her from the demanding customers and complex technical challenges that the rest of us handled routinely. She was being set up to succeed in ways she couldn't even recognize. But here's what Gregory didn't anticipate. I'm not someone who explodes when I'm angry. I don't storm into HR offices or send company-wide emails exposing unfairness. I've learned that the most devastating responses often look like kindness from the outside. I started with Isabel herself. "I've been thinking about your development." I told her the following Monday, perching on the edge of her workspace. "You're clearly management material, and I think you could benefit from some advanced training." Her face lit up immediately. "Really? I'd love that, Celine. You're honestly the smartest person on this whole team." Over the next week, I began what I called Isabel's accelerated learning program. I taught her our most sophisticated client management techniques, the complex analytical frameworks that took me 2 years to master, and the intricate technical specifications that even senior consultants struggled with. I showed her how to build comprehensive project timelines that accounted for every possible variable. I explained the nuanced relationship dynamics between different departments within our biggest client organizations. I walked her through advanced negotiation tactics that required deep industry knowledge and years of relationship-building experience. Isabel absorbed everything eagerly, taking detailed notes and asking thoughtful questions. She had genuine intelligence and impressive determination. Under normal circumstances, she might have developed into an excellent consultant given proper time and mentorship. But these weren't normal circumstances. Gregory had decided she was ready for major responsibilities immediately, based not on her actual capabilities, but on his personal affection for her family. I began recommending Isabel for increasingly complex assignments. When a demanding client requested someone to handle their software integration project, I suggested Isabel would be perfect for the challenge. When we needed someone to present our quarterly analysis to the executive board, I proposed that Isabel had exactly the fresh perspective they were looking for. Gregory approved every recommendation enthusiastically. He was so pleased to see his protégé receiving opportunities that he never questioned whether she was actually prepared for them. Meanwhile, I made another strategic adjustment to my own work habits. For 4 years, I'd been the person who stayed late to fix problems that emerged after hours. I'd taken calls during weekend family gatherings and answered urgent emails while sitting in restaurants. I'd volunteered for overtime projects, covered for colleagues during their vacations, and absorbed extra responsibilities whenever departments were understaffed. I'd become so reliable that my contributions had become invisible. Management assumed I would always be available, always willing to handle whatever crisis emerged, always capable of pulling solutions out of nowhere when everything else failed. I decided to test that assumption. I started leaving the office at exactly 5:30. When weekend emergencies arose, I responded Monday morning with apologies about being unreachable. When colleagues asked me to cover additional projects, I politely explained that my current workload was already quite full. I wasn't being defiant or obviously uncooperative. I was simply establishing the boundaries that healthy employees are supposed to maintain. The boundaries that everyone else had always maintained while I carried the extra weight. The effects became apparent within days. Client calls that I usually handled went to voicemail. Technical problems that I normally resolved festered over weekends. Project timelines that depended on my weekend availability began slipping. The seamless operation that everyone had taken for granted started developing obvious cracks. At the same time, Isabel was discovering the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical application. The sophisticated techniques I'd taught her required institutional memory and relationship capital that she simply hadn't had time to develop. The complex projects she'd been assigned demanded judgment calls that only came from experience she didn't possess. Her presentations began showing strain. She could articulate the frameworks I'd taught her, but she struggled to adapt them when clients asked unexpected questions. She understood the analytical models conceptually, but she couldn't troubleshoot when the data didn't fit standard patterns. I watched this unfold with careful attention but no intervention. When Isabel approached me looking overwhelmed, I offered encouraging words and general support. When she asked for specific help with particular challenges, I reminded her that learning to solve difficult problems independently was an essential skill for senior consultants. "You're incredibly capable, Isabel," I told her sincerely. "I have complete confidence that you'll figure out the best approach." Gregory began looking increasingly concerned as small problems accumulated into larger issues. Projects that should have run smoothly hit unexpected complications. Clients who had been satisfied started expressing frustration about delayed responses and incomplete solutions. The division's reputation for seamless service began showing wear. He approached me during the 3rd week with barely concealed desperation. Celine, I know you've been maintaining better work-life balance lately, which is admirable, he said carefully. But we're facing some urgent situations that could really benefit from your expertise. I listened thoughtfully to his list of mounting crises. Each one was a problem I would have solved automatically in the past, working whatever hours were necessary to maintain the department's flawless reputation. Those do sound challenging, I agreed. I'm confident the team will find effective solutions. Isabel has been doing such impressive work lately. Gregory's expression tightened slightly. Isabel is still developing her skills. These situations require someone with more experience. I understand your concern, I replied. Unfortunately, I'm completely committed to my current projects for the next several weeks. Perhaps you could consider bringing in external consultants for the additional capacity. External consultants would cost the company roughly 3 times my salary for the same work. Gregory knew this as well as I did. That afternoon, I received a call that changed everything. Diana Westfield from Apex Strategic Solutions had been trying to reach me for months about a senior consultant position. I'd been politely declining her approaches because I valued stability over opportunity. This time, I listened carefully to her offer. The base salary was 40% higher than my current compensation. The bonus structure was transparent and merit-based, with clear performance metrics. The company culture emphasized professional development and work-life balance. Most importantly, they specialized in exactly the type of complex technical consulting that I found most intellectually engaging. I'm very interested, I told Diana. How quickly could we move forward with this conversation? We could have you in for interviews this week, she replied immediately. I've been hoping to connect with you for so long that I'd be willing to expedite our entire process. I scheduled the interviews for Thursday and Friday, using personal days that I'd accumulated but never taken. The process exceeded my expectations completely. Apex Strategic Solutions had built exactly the kind of environment I'd always wished my current company could become. By Friday afternoon, they offered me a position that included a $20,000 signing bonus, 60% salary increase, and equity participation that could be worth significantly more than money over time. I asked for the weekend to consider their offer, knowing I'd already made my decision. Monday morning, I arrived at the office with a resignation letter in my bag and a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. Gregory intercepted me before I reached my desk. Celine, we need to talk, he said urgently. Several major clients have expressed concerns about service quality lately. I think we need to reassess some of our recent project assignments. He was finally ready to acknowledge that his golden intern wasn't prepared for the responsibilities he'd given her. But instead of admitting his mistake directly, he wanted me to quietly fix the problems without discussion or recognition. I looked at him standing there, desperate for me to rescue the situation he'd created through his favoritism, and I felt the final piece of my plan sliding into place. Gregory, I appreciate you bringing these concerns to my attention, I said calmly. I think this conversation is perfectly timed, actually. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope I'd been carrying all morning. I wanted to let you know that I'll be transitioning to a new opportunity. This is my formal resignation letter. My last day will be 2 weeks from today. The color drained from Gregory's face as he stared at the envelope like it contained a bomb. Celine, this timing is really difficult, he stammered. Can we discuss what it would take to retain you? I'm sure we can address any concerns you might have about compensation or advancement opportunities. I handed him the resignation letter with a genuine smile. I'm grateful for everything I've learned here, Gregory. This decision isn't about dissatisfaction. Sometimes, new challenges just align perfectly with your professional goals. He opened the letter immediately, scanning it with growing panic. You're giving exactly the minimum required notice during our busiest quarter, he said, looking up at me. Is there any flexibility on your start date with the new company? Unfortunately, no. They need someone to begin immediately on a time-sensitive project that matches my expertise perfectly. This was completely true. Apex Strategic Solutions had a major client implementation beginning in 3 weeks that required exactly my skill set. Diana had been thrilled when I'd accepted their offer with such a quick turnaround. Gregory was clearly calculating the impossibility of his situation. Training a replacement for my responsibilities would take months, assuming he could find someone with comparable experience willing to work at my current salary level. The ongoing client crises needed immediate attention from someone who understood both the technical requirements and the relationship dynamics involved. Most importantly, he was realizing that his decision to give my bonus to Isabel had created the exact circumstances that made my departure so devastating. "Celine, I want to be completely transparent with you," he said, lowering his voice. "I think there may have been some miscommunication about the quarterly bonus allocation. I'd like to revisit that decision and ensure you receive appropriate recognition for your contributions." I looked at him with genuine sympathy. "Gregory, I truly appreciate that gesture, but my decision isn't connected to the bonus situation. Isabel absolutely deserved that recognition, and I'm happy she received it." This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when he would understand that his attempt to fix the money wouldn't repair the underlying problem. "Sometimes the best opportunities come from unexpected timing," I continued. "I'm actually grateful that everything worked out exactly as it did." Over the next 2 weeks, I watched the full scope of my departure's impact unfold, like a carefully orchestrated symphony. Isabel approached me on my third to last day, looking exhausted and overwhelmed. "Celine, I need to ask you something honestly," she said. "Did you know this would happen when you started teaching me those advanced techniques?" I considered her question carefully. Isabel had grown significantly over the past month, even as she'd struggled. The pressure had revealed her actual capabilities and limitations in ways that gentle development never could have. "I knew you were intelligent enough to handle complex challenges," I told her truthfully. "I also knew you'd need to discover your own approaches to solving difficult problems." She nodded slowly. "I think I understand now why you've been so successful here. It's not just about knowing the right techniques. It's about having the experience to know when and how to apply them." "Exactly. And now you're building that experience much faster than you would have otherwise." Isabel had indeed learned more in 4 weeks than she probably would have in 6 months of gradual development. The intensity had been overwhelming, but it had also shown her exactly what skills she needed to develop and how much work lay ahead of her. "I'm going to ask Gregory to adjust my responsibilities," she said. "I think I was promoted too quickly, and I want to make sure I'm actually ready before I take on anything this complex again." I felt genuine pride watching her take ownership of her development. She'd transformed from someone who didn't know what she didn't know into someone who could accurately assess her own capabilities. "That sounds like excellent judgment," I told her. Meanwhile, the operational impacts of my departure were becoming impossible to ignore. The client who'd been waiting for their software integration solution had threatened to terminate their contract unless they received immediate resolution. The executive board presentation that Isabel had been assigned was postponed twice because nobody else could compile the necessary analysis in time. Most significantly, 3 other senior consultants had approached Gregory, requesting salary discussions. My departure had prompted them to evaluate their own compensation and workload balance. They'd started wondering why they'd been accepting below-market salaries while handling above-average responsibilities. Gregory found himself facing not just the loss of his most productive team member, but a potential exodus of experienced staff who were suddenly questioning the department's compensation structure. On my final Friday, Gregory requested a private meeting. "Celine, I want you to know that I recognize the mistakes I made," he said. "The bonus decision was influenced by factors that shouldn't have been relevant. You deserved that recognition, and I let personal considerations cloud my professional judgment." I appreciated his honesty more than he probably realized. "I respect you for acknowledging that, Gregory. Those kinds of decisions are difficult, and I understand the pressures you face." "Is there anything I can do to change your mind about leaving?" he asked. "A counteroffer, additional responsibilities, a commitment to more transparent recognition processes?" I considered how to respond. Gregory was genuinely trying to make amends, but he was also discovering the consequences of prioritizing favoritism over competence. "I think this transition is beneficial for everyone involved," I said finally. "You'll have the opportunity to restructure the team in ways that better support long-term success. Isabel will be able to develop her skills at a more sustainable pace, and I'll be taking on challenges that align perfectly with my professional goals." Can I ask where you're going? Apex Strategic Solutions. They specialize in the complex technical consulting that I find most engaging. Gregory's expression shifted to something approaching admiration mixed with regret. They're our biggest competitor in the enterprise consulting space, he said quietly. You'll be working on exactly the types of projects that you've always handled best here. That's exactly why the opportunity was so appealing. What Gregory didn't know was that Diana had been recruiting me specifically because Apex had been losing potential clients to our company. My reputation in the industry was strong enough that several enterprise customers had chosen our firm primarily because they wanted to work with me personally. Now those relationships would be transitioning to Apex along with my departure, not through any deliberate client poaching, but through the natural movement that happens when trusted consultants change firms. The irony was perfect. Gregory's decision to give my bonus to someone else had prompted my departure, which would ultimately cost his company far more than $72,000 in lost revenue and competitive disadvantage. On my last day, Isabel organized a small farewell gathering. The entire team attended, including Gregory, who looked genuinely sad to see me leave. Celine has been the backbone of this department, he announced to the group. Her professionalism, expertise, and mentorship have contributed to every success we've achieved over the past 4 years. I looked around the room at colleagues who had become friends, at Isabel, who had grown so much in such a short time, and at Gregory, who was finally understanding the cost of his choices. Thank you all for making this such a meaningful experience, I said. I'm excited to see how everyone continues growing and achieving amazing things. 3 months later, I received a LinkedIn message from Isabel. She'd been promoted to a senior consultant position, but with appropriate preparation and support this time. She'd also been featured in the company newsletter for developing an innovative client training program. I wanted to thank you for pushing me to grow faster than I thought possible, she wrote. I know those weeks were overwhelming, but I learned more about myself and my capabilities than I would have in years of gradual development. I hope we can collaborate again someday. Gregory had reached out as well, asking if I'd be willing to provide consulting services for specific projects where our expertise might complement each other. His department had recovered from my departure, but they'd restructured their approach to talent development and compensation to prevent similar situations. As for me, Apex Strategic Solutions exceeded every expectation I'd had. The work was intellectually stimulating, the culture genuinely supported professional growth, and the compensation reflected the value I brought to complex client challenges. Most importantly, I'd learned something crucial about my own worth. For years, I'd been so focused on proving myself through extra effort and uncomplaining reliability that I'd become undervalued and taken for granted. The bonus situation had forced me to recognize that my contributions were significant enough to command respect and appropriate recognition. The revenge wasn't about destroying anyone or causing permanent damage. It was about stepping away from a situation where my value wasn't recognized and allowing natural consequences to demonstrate what that value actually was. Gregory learned that favoritism creates exactly the kind of instability that strong performers won't tolerate. Isabel learned to assess her own readiness before accepting responsibilities beyond her current capabilities. The department learned to structure compensation and recognition systems that actually reflected merit rather than personal relationships. I learned that sometimes the most powerful response to unfairness isn't fighting against it, but simply refusing to enable it anymore. The $72,000 bonus that started this whole situation turned out to be the cheapest lesson Gregory's department ever received about the cost of losing their most valuable contributors. And honestly, watching everything unfold exactly as I'd anticipated was more satisfying than any amount of money could have been. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt undervalued or overlooked despite your contributions, please hit the like button and share your own experiences in the comments. Sometimes we need to hear that other people understand what it feels like to watch connections matter more than competence. Subscribe for more stories about finding your worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve, because your value doesn't depend on other people recognizing it. You get to decide when enough is enough. The monitor's beeping slowed as I blinked away anesthesia fog, white ceiling, antiseptic smell, pain throbbing beneath layers of medication. Andy? Can you hear me? A blue-masked face hovered above. The surgery went as well as could be expected. The crush injury was severe, but we've managed to save your leg. I tried to nod, but my neck muscles refused to cooperate. You'll need extensive rehabilitation. I won't sugarcoat this. Recovery will be challenging, but with consistent therapy, you should regain most function. Most function. The words echoed as I glanced down at the bulky bandages where my right leg disappeared beneath sheets. 8 hours earlier, I'd been conducting a routine safety inspection when the improperly secured scaffold collapsed. The same scaffold I'd flagged 3 times in written reports. My phone buzzed on the side table. The nurse hesitated, then handed it to me when I stretched my fingers toward it. Through medication haze, I squinted at the screen. The message was from Heath, my boss of 8 years. Don't bother returning. You're terminated. Clear out your desk. Find another job. The room tilted sideways. 8 years supervising safety operations at Westward Construction. 8 years of overtime. Missed weekends. Navigating dangerous sites to keep workers safe. Ended with 11 cold words, while medical drains still collected fluid from my crushed leg. My fingers trembled as I typed 3 words in response. See you soon. I dropped the phone and let darkness pull me under again. When I woke hours later, 27 missed calls lit my screen. Coworkers expressing shock, asking questions I couldn't answer. But nothing from Heath. The physical therapist appeared the next morning, all false cheer and practiced optimism. Ready to start the journey back to walking? I smiled thinly. More than ready. What Heath couldn't know was that my termination had solved an impossible dilemma I'd been wrestling with for months. During routine inspections, I'd discovered our company was installing counterfeit structural supports in 3 major buildings, including the new elementary school. These knockoffs looked identical to certified materials, but would buckle under real-world stress. My attempts to report this through proper channels had mysteriously disappeared each time. As the therapist guided me through simple movements that sent lightning bolts of pain through my damaged nerves, I made my decision. From my hospital bed, I made one call to an employment lawyer with a background in construction safety regulations. This termination, while you're hospitalized from a worksite injury, is textbook retaliation, she said after hearing my story. But these counterfeit materials, that puts lives at risk, especially children's lives. As she spoke, I watched the medical team change my bandages, revealing the angry red path of stitches running from knee to ankle. I need to warn you, the lawyer continued. This path might cost you everything professionally. Construction is a small world. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Heath's message. The elementary school set to open in September. 200 children. I'm already paying the price, I answered. Let's make it worth something. If you've ever felt that moment when injustice crystallizes into pure resolve, please hit like. If you want to know how this unfolds, what happened after I pressed send on those 3 little words, see you soon, subscribe now. Because what happened next changed more than just my life. My name is Andy Reeves. Before all this, I was known for 3 things: my meticulous safety reports, my inability to ignore potential hazards, and my legendary patience. That last quality died the day Heath fired me. I grew up with a construction worker father who came home each night with stories, some funny, some terrifying. When he didn't come home one night because of an improperly secured beam, I promised his memory I'd make work sites safer. By 30, I'd earned my safety certification and landed at Westward Construction, where I eventually supervised all safety operations across multiple projects. Heath Mercer had been supportive initially. Safety first was his catchphrase during client meetings. But priorities shifted when the company landed 3 prestigious contracts simultaneously: an elementary school, a hospital wing, and a government building. Suddenly, every inspection that slowed progress became a problem. Every safety concern became excessive caution. We need to be efficient, Andy, became his new mantra. Everyone's counting on these timelines. I tried to be a team player while holding the line on critical issues. But 3 months ago, during a routine materials inspection, I noticed something odd about the structural supports being installed in the elementary school gymnasium. The certification stamps looked slightly off. The spacing between letters inconsistent. The impression too shallow. I quietly pulled the specifications and made calls to the supposed manufacturer. Their records showed no delivery to our site. The materials were counterfeit, convincing replicas that would pass visual inspection, but lacked the load-bearing capacity of genuine supports. That night, I drafted a comprehensive report and sent it directly to Heath. By morning, it had vanished from the system. When I mentioned it, he looked at me with narrowed eyes. I never received any report. Are you sure you sent it? I tried again, documenting everything meticulously. Again, the report disappeared. When I discovered the same counterfeit materials at the hospital construction site, I knew this wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. 2 weeks before my accident, I began gathering evidence quietly. Photographs, material samples, supplier communications. I created duplicate records off the company servers. I was torn between exposing dangerous practices and protecting coworkers whose families depended on these jobs. The scaffold inspection that ended with my leg crushed under twisted metal was one Heath had insisted I conduct personally, despite my written concerns about its stability. If you're so worried about safety, he'd said with a tight smile, you should verify it yourself. Now, lying in the hospital bed as the lawyer outlined our strategy, I realized Heath had never expected me to find definitive proof of the counterfeit materials. And once I had, he'd created a situation where I'd either back down or be removed. He just hadn't planned on removing me in a way that freed me completely from any remaining loyalty. For 48 hours, my lawyer worked methodically, submitting my detailed records to building inspectors and safety regulators. Meanwhile, Westward remained oblivious until inspectors arrived unannounced at the school construction site. On the third day, as a physical therapist helped me attempt my first painful stand on crutches, my phone began lighting up with bewildered messages from coworkers describing government vehicles at our offices. News alerts mentioned urgent safety inspections at our building sites. And missed calls accumulated 23 from Brooke, the HR director, alone. When I finally answered, panic strained her voice. Andy, please, we need to talk. This misunderstanding has gone too far. We can't afford the liability lawsuit you're bringing. Inspectors have halted all our projects. The board is in emergency meetings. This was never about money, I replied calmly. 200 children would have attended that school next fall. What happens when those support beams fail during a winter storm? The executive team is willing to make significant changes, she pleaded. I watched a nurse adjust my IV drip. Here's what happens next. Complete replacement of every counterfeit component, supervised by independent inspectors. A public statement acknowledging the substitutions, and Heath faces the regulatory board for knowingly endangering public safety. You're asking for the impossible. Heath is responsible. I finished for her, just like I would have been if I'd stayed silent. I hung up as the physical therapist returned. Ready to try again? She asked. Each attempt to put weight on my damaged leg sent white-hot pain shooting up to my hip. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I fought to remain upright. Think of it as rebuilding, she encouraged. Your body is learning a new way forward. So was I. That night, local news ran a brief segment about safety concerns, halting construction at 3 major Westward projects. The company's statement called it routine compliance verification. My heart sank. Were they going to escape with minor fines? A slap on the wrist? All my evidence? My sacrifice? Reduced to a temporary inconvenience for Heath? I stared at my leg, wondering if justice would be as crippled as I felt. Then came the turning point. An inspector discovered the same counterfeit supports had been used in the hospital's new cancer treatment wing. Suddenly, regulators swarmed every project Westward had completed in 5 years. My phone rang at midnight. Heath's name flashed on the screen. You vindictive witch, he hissed when I answered. Do you have any idea what you've done? We're talking about hundreds of jobs, millions in contracts. I know exactly what I've done, I replied. I've stopped buildings from collapsing on innocent people. These materials passed every visual inspection. The risk was minimal. Minimal? My voice rose. Like the minimal risk of that scaffold you ordered me to inspect personally after I reported it was unstable? Silence stretched between us. That was an unfortunate accident, he finally said, voice carefully controlled. Was it? I asked softly. Because from my hospital bed, with surgical drains still in my leg. It looks a lot like you needed me gone before I found more evidence. You can't prove that. Maybe not, but I've proven enough to bring inspectors to every site where you cut corners. Where does the chain of paperwork lead, Heath? Who approved the counterfeit materials? Who profited from the substitutions? He hung up. The next morning, Brooke appeared in my hospital room, handbag clutched tight against her chest. The board wants to settle, she said without preamble. Name your price. I adjusted myself painfully in the bed. I already told you my terms. Heath is a major shareholder. The board can't simply remove him. Then the inspections continue, and I cooperate fully with every investigation. Brooke's professional composure cracked. Please, Andy, I'm begging you. There are 400 families depending on Westward's survival. I thought about my father, about promises made at his funeral, about the elementary school and hospital patients who would never know how close they came to disaster. I don't want Westward destroyed, I said quietly. I want it fixed. She looked up, hope flickering across her face. If the board agrees to independent safety monitoring for 5 years, replacement of all identified counterfeit materials, and Heath's removal from operational decisions, I'll limit my personal claim to medical expenses and 2 years' salary. And Heath? That's between him and the regulatory board. After she left, I tried standing again with the therapist's help. This time, I managed 3 steps before the pain forced me back to the bed. Progress, the therapist noted, writing in my chart. That afternoon, news broke that Westward's projects remained suspended pending comprehensive material verification. Financial analysts predicted the company might not survive the scandal. The elementary school's opening would be delayed at least a year. My lawyer called with updates. The regulators found evidence of systematic substitution going back 3 years. They're moving from safety violations to potential criminal fraud charges. Against Westward or individuals. They're still determining that, but I received a settlement offer from the company that meets your terms, with one addition. They want a confidentiality agreement. I thought about all those who might face similar situations in the future, about safety inspectors pressured to overlook violations, about workers afraid to report dangers. No confidentiality clause, I replied. I need to be able to speak about what happened. That evening, while attempting my exercises, a text arrived from Kit, my closest coworker. Emergency board meeting happening now. Rumors of major restructuring. Heath locked in with lawyers all day. What's really going on? I hadn't told anyone at Westward about my discoveries. Now I wondered how many might have suspected but stayed silent. How many might have known. As I considered my response, breaking news alerts appeared on my phone. Construction giant faces potential criminal charges in counterfeit materials scandal. The company's stock plummeted. Project clients began publicly reviewing their options. The mayor announced an emergency inspection of all recently constructed public buildings. My phone lit up with Heath's name again. Against better judgment, I answered. You could have come to me privately, he said, voice tight with controlled fury. Instead, you've destroyed everything we built. I did come to you, twice. My reports disappeared. Those reports were alarmist. We had assurances from the supplier. Stop lying, Heath. The supplier didn't exist. It was a shell created to import these knockoffs. I found the paper trail. His silence confirmed what I'd suspected. How long have you known? I asked, unable to hide the tremor in my voice. This conversation is over. My attorney advises against further contact. The line went dead. I set down my phone, staring at the hospital ceiling as darkness gathered outside my window. 8 years of my career spent believing I was protecting people, only to discover I'd been used as window dressing for a company cutting corners in ways that could have killed hundreds. 3 days later, the physical therapist helped me into a wheelchair. You've graduated from bed rest. Consider this progress. Progress felt like a mockery when my formerly athletic body now struggled with basic movement. Each therapy session left me drenched in sweat, teeth clenched against waves of pain. Nights brought restless sleep interrupted by throbbing aches and memories of metal collapsing around me. Meanwhile, the investigation expanded. Building inspectors discovered counterfeit materials in 7 more Westward projects. The board announced Heath's temporary leave of absence pending internal review. Reporters camped outside company headquarters, thrust microphones at employees entering and leaving. Brooke called twice daily with increasingly desperate settlement offers. The company's on the brink, Andy. 400 jobs hanging by a thread. The materials must be replaced, I repeated each time. No shortcuts. That's a $30 million undertaking. Cheaper than funerals. What the public didn't yet know, what my lawyer was carefully documenting, was that the counterfeit materials scheme had generated enormous profits. Somewhere, money that should have purchased proper structural supports sat in accounts while children would have played beneath disaster waiting to happen. 6 days after surgery, Kit sneaked into my hospital room, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "I'm not supposed to be here," she whispered, setting down a small plant. "HR sent a memo forbidding contact with you." "How thoughtful of them," I said, shifting painfully to sit up straighter. "How are things inside?" Kit's face tightened. "Chaos, inspectors everywhere. They've seized computers, files. People are jumping ship daily. And Heath? Gone underground. Rumor says he flew to his lake house. But here's what's weird." She leaned closer. "The night before your accident, I saw him removing boxes from his office. After hours, when he thought everyone had left. A chill spread through me. He knew." "Knew what?" I hesitated. How much could I safely tell her? "That something was coming," I said carefully. "Kit, did you ever notice anything odd about the structural supports at the elementary school?" Her eyes widened slightly before she looked away. "I'm not in materials inspection, but you saw something." Her hands twisted in her lap. "Maybe. Some discrepancies in the shipping manifests. Numbers that didn't match orders. I mentioned it to Heath once. He said accounting would handle it. And you left it there?" Shame colored her face. "I have twins in college, Andy. This job pays their tuition." I didn't judge her. How many others had noticed problems and stayed silent for similar reasons? How close had I come to doing the same? "You should go," I told her. "Being seen with me won't help you." As she left, she paused at the door. "For what it's worth, most of us respect what you're doing. We're just scared." That night, I attempted to stand without assistance, gripping the hospital bed rail. My damaged leg trembled violently, barely supporting a fraction of my weight. One step. Burning pain. Another step. Sweat beaded on my forehead. 3 steps before collapsing back onto the bed, my breath coming in harsh gasps. Not enough. Not nearly enough. My phone chimed with a news alert. Construction Safety Director raises questions about inspection procedures. The article quoted an anonymous Westward executive claiming I had personally approved the questioned materials. They were setting me up as the scapegoat. I called my lawyer immediately. "They're trying to pin this on me. Expected move," she replied calmly, "but ineffective. Your documentation shows you flagged these issues repeatedly. Their digital cleanup wasn't as thorough as they thought." "What do you mean?" "The IT specialist I hired recovered fragments of your deleted reports from the company server backups. Enough to establish you raised concerns. Enough to prove someone intentionally removed them." Relief washed through me, followed quickly by renewed determination. "What's our next move?" "Tomorrow, the regulatory board convenes its preliminary hearing. Westward will present their explanation for the materials discrepancies. Want to attend? Will Heath be there?" His attorneys filed notice he'll appear via video link, citing security concerns. Of course, he wouldn't face me in person. "I'll be there." The next morning required extraordinary effort. Any ice, hospital discharge paperwork, awkward maneuvering into suitable clothes that would fit over my bandages, painful navigation on crutches to my lawyer's waiting car. Every movement sent shocks of pain through my leg, but I refused additional medication. I needed clarity today. The regulatory board had commandeered a downtown conference room. As I hobbled in on crutches, conversations hushed momentarily before resuming at lower volumes. Reporters scribbled notes. Regulatory officials shuffled papers. At the front table sat 5 Westward representatives, including Brooke, who pointedly avoided eye contact. A large screen displayed Heath's face, his lake house visible in the background. His expression remained neutral when he saw me, but his left eye twitched slightly, the same tell I'd noticed whenever he lied during performance reviews. The board chairman called the hearing to order. This preliminary inquiry concerns alleged safety violations and potential fraudulent materials substitution at multiple construction sites managed by Westward Construction. For 2 hours, company attorneys presented a carefully constructed narrative: isolated incidents, supplier verification failures, procedural oversights, never fraud, never intentional. Heath spoke briefly, expressing profound concern and commitment to complete transparency and remedy. Finally, the chairman turned to me. Ms. Reeves, as former safety operations supervisor, would you care to address the board? My lawyer helped me stand. The pain in my leg intensified as I put weight on my crutches, but I focused on Heath's face on the screen. 3 months ago, I discovered counterfeit structural supports being installed in an elementary school gymnasium. I documented my findings and reported them through proper channels, twice. Both reports vanished from our systems. 2 weeks ago, I was conducting an inspection that my superior, I nodded toward Heath's image, specifically instructed me to perform personally. Despite my written safety concerns about the scaffold, that scaffold collapsed, resulting in injuries requiring surgical intervention. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the board members. While I was in surgery, Mr. Mercer terminated my employment via text message. That termination freed me to share what I had discovered: that Westward has systematically replaced certified structural supports with counterfeit materials in at least 10 projects over the past 3 years. Heath's attorney interrupted. These are unsubstantiated allegations from a disgruntled former employee seeking financial gain. I have substantiation, I replied steadily. Complete documentation of the original reports, material samples, photographic evidence, and shipping records showing the counterfeit supply chain. Additionally, recovered server data showing my reports were deliberately deleted from company systems. The room erupted in murmurs. Heath's face on the screen had gone rigid. The chairman raised his hand for silence. These are serious allegations requiring thorough investigation. This hearing will recess while the board reviews the provided materials. As officials filed out, reporters surged forward with questions. My lawyer shielded me, guiding me toward a side door. Through the crowd, I caught Brooke's eye. Her expression wasn't anger as I expected, but something closer to resignation. In the hallway, away from cameras, she approached cautiously. The board didn't know, Andy, about your reports being deleted, about Heath ordering you onto that scaffold, but they suspected something wasn't right with the materials. She didn't deny it. Cost-cutting pressures have been intense since the pandemic. The contracts were bid too low to begin with. That doesn't justify endangering lives. No, she agreed quietly. It doesn't. My phone buzzed with a text from Kit. Executives in emergency meeting. Shredders running overtime in accounting. I showed it to my lawyer, who immediately placed calls to the regulatory board and district attorney's office. Within an hour, news broke that authorities had obtained an emergency order to secure all Westward financial records. Heath's video feed to the hearing mysteriously disconnected. When authorities arrived at his lake house, he was gone. For the next 2 weeks, I focused on physical therapy while the investigation unfolded in headlines. Construction exec missing as fraud investigation deepens. Counterfeit building materials traced to overseas supplier. Westward Construction faces class action from project clients. Criminal charges expected in building materials fraud case. Through it all, Heath remained missing. His passport hadn't been used. His known accounts showed no recent activity. Speculation ran wild. He'd fled with falsified documents, was hiding with accomplices, had ended his life rather than face charges. 23 days after my surgery, I managed to walk 10 steps unassisted. The physical therapist beamed. Remarkable progress. That same day, regulators announced Westward would operate under court-appointed oversight while replacing all counterfeit materials. The company would survive, but with new leadership and stringent monitoring. 400 jobs preserved, though the financial penalties would be substantial. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, restlessness gnawed at me. Heath had vanished, potentially escaping accountability entirely. The person most responsible might never face consequences while workers and clients suffered the fallout. That evening, my doorbell rang. I moved painfully to answer it, expecting the food delivery I'd ordered. Instead, Brooke stood there, clutching a manila envelope. "May I come in?" she asked, eyes darting nervously behind her. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered, declining to sit when offered. "The board finalized your settlement agreement today," she said, extending the envelope. "Everything you asked for, plus additional compensation for your injuries." I set it aside, unopened. "Have they heard from Heath?" "No. His attorneys claim no knowledge of his whereabouts." She shifted uncomfortably. "That's not why I'm here." Then why?" She pulled a thumb drive from her pocket. "During the records review, I found something. Financial transfers to an account in Belize, regular payments coinciding with materials deliveries, coded as consultant fees but with no corresponding contractor. Heath's kickbacks from the counterfeit supplier? Yes, but he wasn't the only one receiving payments. She handed me the drive. 3 board members were involved. They've quietly resigned, but there won't be charges. The company can't withstand more scandal. Why give this to me? Her professional composure cracked. Because 20 years ago, I was an architect. I designed a small apartment building that collapsed during construction. 3 workers died. The investigation cleared me, blamed contractor negligence. But I've always wondered if I missed something in my designs. I joined Westward to ensure projects were built safely. Tears welled in her eyes. I failed. I suspected problems, but convinced myself Heath was handling them. People could have died because I didn't look harder. I studied her, seeing genuine remorse. "What do you expect me to do with this?" "Whatever you think is right." She moved toward the door. "The settlement is unconditional. The information is yours regardless." After she left, I stared at the thumb drive for hours. More revelations would devastate Westward entirely. 400 jobs, families, communities, but accountability mattered too. My phone rang, my lawyer with news. "They've located Heath. Border Patrol detained him trying to cross into Canada with altered identification. He's being returned to face charges." A weight lifted from my chest. Will the charges stick? The evidence is overwhelming. Multiple felony counts of fraud, endangerment, falsification of safety records. He's looking at substantial prison time. I glanced at the thumb drive. What about his accomplices? The investigation continues. Why? I thought about Brooke's tear-filled confession, about Kit's fear for her children's education, about 400 families. No reason, I said, just being thorough. 3 months after my injury, I watched the evening news from my physical therapy session. Heath appeared on screen in handcuffs, being led into court for his arraignment. The company president had resigned in disgrace. Westward continued under new leadership and strict oversight, the replacement of counterfeit materials proceeding under independent verification. My settlement established a whistleblower fund for construction workers who report safety violations. The therapist observed my walking progress. "You'll always have a slight limp. The nerve damage was too extensive for complete recovery." I nodded, taking another careful step. The pain remained, duller now but constant. With each step, I remembered that sometimes getting broken is necessary to prevent others from being broken too. What I didn't tell the therapist, as what I hadn't told anyone, was that the limp served as my daily reminder of unfinished business. Heath would face justice through the courts. But the board members who enabled him, who profited alongside him while endangering countless lives, remained protected by corporate shields and legal maneuvers. Brooke's thumb drive sat in my desk drawer, its contents backed up in multiple secure locations. The day would come to decide what to do with that information. For now, I focused on healing, on each painful step forward. The final chapter of this story hadn't yet been written, because while Heath believed he'd silenced me with that text message, he'd actually set something far more dangerous in motion. He'd given me nothing left to lose. Watching Heath's perp walk on television, I smiled for the first time in months, not because I enjoyed his downfall, but because justice had finally begun its slow, grinding work. The news anchor's voice filled the therapy room. Former construction executive Heath Mercer faces up to 30 years in prison if convicted on all counts. Meanwhile, building inspectors continue examining all structures completed under his supervision. "Is that the man responsible for your injury?" the therapist asked. "Part of the responsibility," I replied, taking another careful step forward. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The board thinks they're safe. Are they? I didn't respond. Not yet. My revenge wasn't about quick satisfaction or public humiliation. It would be served methodically, thoroughly, and with the same careful attention to detail I'd once brought to safety inspections. Because some dangers aren't visible until the entire structure comes crashing down. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button. If you've ever stood up against wrongdoing despite the personal cost, share your experience in the comments. Subscribe to hear more stories about justice that comes not in dramatic moments, but through quiet, unwavering persistence. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't what we do to others. It's refusing to let them change who we are. Women like you belong in reception. The words slid out of Landon's mouth like poison as we stood in the hallway outside the conference room. 5 years I'd spent developing this renewable energy proposal. 5 years of research, innovation, and relentless work, all to be relegated to serving tea and taking notes. I felt heat rising to my cheeks but kept my expression neutral. Around us, male colleagues adjusted their ties and rehearsed their opening lines. Not one of them had actually written the proposal that would be presented today. The Saudi delegation expects a certain professional atmosphere, Landon continued, glancing meaningfully at my hijab. We need to present our best face. I straightened my jacket. We'll see. His patronizing smile didn't waver. Please make sure there's enough water for everyone. And Aaliyah, he lowered his voice. Try not to speak unless spoken to. The delegation entered. Landon stepped forward with an eager smile. The distinguished lead visitor scanned the room, his brow furrowing in confusion. Where is Vice Minister Aaliyah? He asked. Every head turned. The air in the room changed instantly. Landon stammered. I don't believe... I stepped forward. Your Excellency, welcome to Chicago. The room froze in disbelief as the sheikh took my hand warmly in both of his. The architect of innovation herself, he said with a genuine smile. Our ministry has been most impressed with your vision. If you're still with me, I want you to know this isn't just a story about revenge. It's about justice, about reclaiming what's yours when the world tells you that you don't belong. If you've ever been underestimated, stay with me until the end. You'll want to hear what happens next. My name is Aaliyah Nazari, and until that moment, I was just another invisible woman in a company that collected our talents while minimizing our existence. I had joined Emerald Energy Solutions fresh from graduate school, with dual engineering degrees from MIT and fluency in Arabic, Farsi, and English. My father had been an engineering professor before our family fled Iran during the revolution. Education wasn't just encouraged in our home, it was reverence. I still remember my first week at Emerald. I sat in a meeting where I presented my ideas for improving solar panel efficiency. 2 days later, I heard Connor, a man who'd been hired the same day as me, praised for his innovative approach, which was word for word what I had suggested. When I mentioned this to my team leader, he said I must have misremembered. I didn't. This pattern repeated for years. My project succeeded while credit went to others. My recommendations were ignored until voiced by male colleagues. I was passed over for promotions that went to men I had trained. Each time, there was a reason. Not enough experience. Not assertive enough. Not quite ready. Meanwhile, Landon rose to division head with alarming speed. He had a gift. Not for innovation, but for claiming ownership of other people's work, particularly women's work. He collected our ideas like trophies and displayed them as his own. The breaking point came 3 years into my time at Emerald. I had developed a radical new approach to solar implementation that could reduce costs by 35%. When I presented it to Landon, he dismissed it as unrealistic and too ambitious. 1 month later, he unveiled the exact same proposal to the board, with his name on it. That night, I went home and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me had dark circles under her eyes and a defeated posture. Is this who you are now? I asked myself. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind. She had cleaned offices at night to fund my mother's education, who then became a doctor and supported mine. Your knowledge is the one thing no one can take from you, she always said. The next day, I made a decision that would change everything. I volunteered for a cultural exchange program our company had with several Middle Eastern countries. My language skills and technical knowledge opened doors to diplomatic circles that were typically closed to outsiders. Evenings and weekends, I translated technical documents and facilitated discussions between officials. No one at work knew. They never asked about my life, assuming I had none beyond serving their ambitions. "You're different from the others at your company," Sheikh Tariq told me one evening after a particularly productive session where I'd helped navigate a complex technical impasse. "You understand both the science and the cultural nuances. That's rare." Gradually, I built a reputation among international energy ministers and officials. My expertise was recognized and respected. 6 months before the fateful meeting with Landon, I received a call from the Foreign Ministry. "We would like to appoint you as Vice Minister for International Energy Cooperation," the official said. "You would serve as our representative in key negotiations while maintaining your position at Emerald." I accepted immediately. The irony was exquisite. At Emerald, I was still asked to order lunch and take notes in meetings where men explained my own research to me. In diplomatic circles, I was addressed as Vice Minister and consulted on billion-dollar decisions. I kept my dual roles separate, not out of deception but necessity. I had learned that Emerald would never recognize my value unless forced to do so. The opportunity would come. I just needed to be patient. Which brings us back to that moment in the conference room, when Sheikh Tariq asked for me by name, and everything changed. The Sheikh smiled at me. "Your innovative approach to solar implementation impressed our ministry greatly." Landon attempted recovery, his face a study in controlled panic. "She assists with our projects, but I lead this initiative." "Strange," said Sheikh Tariq, tilting his head slightly. "Our government has been working directly with the Vice Minister for months. In fact, the proposal we're discussing today bears her signature." The room fell silent as every eye turned to me. The men who had ignored and dismissed me for years now stared in confusion and disbelief. I felt a lifetime of underestimation, culminating in this perfect moment of reckoning. But this was just the beginning. Once the meeting concluded, with the Sheikh making it clear he would only deal with me, Landon pulled me into a side room, his face contorted with rage. "You've been operating behind the company's back, working with foreign governments without authorization? You're terminated, effective immediately." I remained calm, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from my sleeve. "That would be unwise." "Excuse me?" "This would be your largest contract ever. 300 million in the first phase alone. The delegation will only work with me." His face reddened. "What do you want? A promotion? Money? Tell me what this little stunt is about." "I want change. Real structural change. Women-led teams, equal pay transparency, and something else." "What?" he snapped. "The company will establish a foundation for girls in engineering, with full scholarships, named after my grandmother who cleaned offices at night to fund my mother's education." He scoffed. "Ridiculous. The board would never—" "Then I'll take Sheikh Tariq and his delegation to your competitors. By tomorrow." I watched him calculate the losses. Hundreds of millions in immediate contracts, billions in potential future deals. His jaw worked silently. "You're bluffing," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. I took out my phone. Shall I call the Sheikh now and let him know Emerald isn't interested? I believe Horizon Energy would be very receptive. Have you ever seen someone realize they've lost all power in a situation they thought they controlled? It's a fascinating transformation to witness. First comes disbelief, then anger, followed by the desperate scramble to salvage something, anything, from the wreckage. Landon went through all these stages in the span of 30 seconds. His face, so accustomed to wearing superiority like a comfortable mask, crumpled into uncertainty. "The board will need to approve any changes," he said weakly. "I'm sure you'll find a way to convince them. You've always been so persuasive with my ideas before." He flinched at that. Direct hit. "You could have just told me about your position," he said, attempting to reframe the narrative. "We could have worked together." "Like we worked together on my solar implementation proposal? The one you called unrealistic until you presented it as your own?" His eyes widened slightly. He hadn't expected me to bring that up so directly. "That was a misunderstanding," he said, his voice hollow. No, it was theft. But now, we have an opportunity to create something better. I handed him a document I'd prepared in advance, outlining the changes I wanted implemented. He took it wordlessly, his fingers trembling slightly. You have until tomorrow morning to get board approval, I said, turning to leave. The sheikh expects an answer by noon. And if I refuse? A last, desperate attempt to assert control. I paused at the door and looked back at him. Then I'll build something better elsewhere, and you'll spend the rest of your career watching me succeed. As I walked out, I felt lighter than I had in years. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, not just for me, but for every woman who had been silenced, overlooked, and underestimated. The next 24 hours were transformative. Emergency board meetings, frantic calls, negotiations that stretched into the night. I watched from the periphery as Landon fought for his survival, suddenly championing the very causes he had dismissed for years. 1 week later, a press release announced our historic partnership with Saudi investors, the new scholarship foundation for women in engineering, and my elevation to the executive team as Chief Innovation Officer. Landon remained in his position. I hadn't wanted him removed. That would have been too easy, too clean. No, my revenge wasn't destroying him. It was creating space for every woman coming after me, while he watched his world transform before his eyes. In our first executive meeting, he tried his old tactics, interrupting a female product manager named Imani. I think what she's trying to say is, he began. I'd like to hear Imani finish, I said, my voice pleasant but firm. The room fell silent, and Imani continued, her brilliant analysis receiving the attention it deserved. When Landon attempted to take credit for another team's work, I redirected. That originated with Zoya's team. Zoya, would you like to elaborate on your findings? Each time I saw recognition dawn in the eyes of the women around the table. They sat straighter, spoke more confidently, stopped apologizing before offering opinions. And the most beautiful part? The change was contagious. Women who had been silenced for years found their voices. Men who had been quietly uncomfortable with the old system but unwilling to challenge it now had permission to be allies. The culture shifted, not overnight, but steadily, persistently. Sheikh Tarek became a powerful advocate for our partnership. During his next visit, he brought his daughter, a brilliant young woman studying renewable engineering. After our meeting, she pulled me aside. My father told me what you did, she said, her eyes bright with admiration. How you changed an entire company from within. Sometimes all it takes is refusing to be invisible, I replied. In my country, many women still struggle to be seen. Your story gives me hope. That night, I stood on my apartment balcony overlooking the Chicago skyline. The lights of the city sparkled against the darkness, thousands of tiny illuminations pushing back against the night. I thought about how change happens, not always in dramatic revolutions, but often in quiet refusals to accept the unacceptable. But not everyone welcomed this new world we were building. 3 months after my promotion, I discovered that someone had been altering my technical reports before they reached our international partners. Small changes, numbers adjusted, projections modified, subtle enough to be dismissed as miscommunications, but significant enough to undermine my credibility over time. At first, I suspected Landon. It would be just like him to sabotage me quietly. But when I traced the digital trail, it led not to him, but to Preston, Landon's most loyal director. You should have stayed in your lane. Preston hissed when I confronted him privately. You think you're so special because you speak a few languages? This company was running fine before you decided to play social justice warrior. This company was hemorrhaging female talent and missing opportunities. I corrected him. And now you're falsifying reports. That's grounds for termination. It's your word against mine, he smirked. And I've been here a lot longer than you. Who do you think the board will believe? Neither of us, I replied calmly. They'll believe the evidence. His smirk faltered. What evidence? I didn't answer. Instead, I walked away, leaving him to wonder exactly what I knew and how I knew it. Let him sweat. The truth was, I'd been documenting everything since my earliest days at Emerald. Every stolen idea, every dismissal, every microaggression. It had started as self-protection, a way to maintain my sanity when I was constantly told that my perceptions were wrong. Now, that documentation was power. That evening, I received a text message from an unknown number. Back off or regret it. I should have been frightened. Instead, I felt a cold clarity. They still didn't understand who they were dealing with. I had survived exile and reconstruction of my entire life as a child. I had withstood years of professional erosion without breaking. Did they really think a text message would make me cower? The next morning, I walked into the office and headed straight to the HR director's office. Vivian looked up, surprised to see me. "Aaliyah, what can I do for you?" I placed a flash drive on her desk. "I need to show you something." For the next hour, I walked her through the evidence I'd compiled against Preston. The original reports, the altered versions, the digital forensics proving he had made the changes. "This is disturbing," Vivian said, her expression grave. "But why would he do this?" "Because some people would rather sabotage success than adapt to change." By that afternoon, Preston was escorted from the building. The system that had protected men like him for so long was beginning to crumble. That night, another text message. "You'll pay for this." I took a screenshot and forwarded it to Vivian and our legal team, then blocked the number. I refused to be intimidated, but I wasn't naive. Cornered people can be dangerous. The next week brought our quarterly board meeting. As I prepared my presentation on our international initiatives, I felt a familiar tension in the air. Something was coming. When I entered the boardroom, Landon was already there, huddled with several board members. They fell silent as I approached. Bad sign. "Aaliyah," Chairman Griffith said, his tone overly formal. "Before you begin your presentation, there's a matter we need to discuss." I set down my materials. "Yes?" "It's come to our attention that there may be a conflict of interest in your dual roles as our executive and as a foreign ministry representative." So that was their angle. Not falsified reports, but my integrity. I disclosed my appointment as vice minister during my promotion negotiations. I said calmly, "It's documented in my employment contract addendum, which legal approved." Landon leaned forward. "The concern isn't disclosure, but divided loyalties. How can we be sure you're representing Emerald's interests first?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. I looked around the room, noting who seemed uncomfortable with this line of questioning and who seemed eager to see me stumble. "My dual position is precisely why the Sheikh chose to work with Emerald," I replied. "It's why we secured the largest contract in company history. It's why our international business has grown 42% in 3 months." "Numbers can be misleading," Landon countered. "We need to be certain you're not compromising company interests." I took a slow, deliberate breath. This attack had Landon's fingerprints all over it. He couldn't challenge my results, so he was questioning my loyalty, playing on xenophobic undertones without being explicitly discriminatory. "I find the timing of these concerns interesting," I said. "They arise immediately after I exposed Preston for falsifying reports. Reports that, if they had gone undetected, would have damaged our relationship with Saudi investors and cost this company millions." Chairman Griffith shifted uncomfortably. "We're not suggesting any connection." "Aren't you?" I interrupted. "Because it seems like every time a woman in this company succeeds or exposes misconduct, her character comes under attack." The room fell silent. I hadn't raised my voice, but my words landed with precision. "I have always acted with integrity," I continued. "My work speaks for itself, but if the board feels my dual roles are problematic, I'm prepared to make a choice today." Landon couldn't hide his smile. He thought he had me cornered. "And what choice would that be?" Chairman Griffith asked. "I can resign from Emerald and take my relationships with international partners with me. The Sheikh has already made it clear he works with me, not with the company." The smile vanished from Landon's face. "Or," I continued, "we can recognize that my unique position is an asset to Emerald, not a liability. That diversity of perspective and international connections are strengths in a global market." I paused, looking each board member in the eye. "The choice is yours, but I suggest you consider what serves this company best, progress or regression." The tension in the room was palpable. Chairman Griffith cleared his throat. Perhaps we've been hasty in raising these concerns. Your results have been excellent, Aaliyah. Let's table this discussion and move on to your presentation. I nodded and began setting up my materials, acutely aware of Landon's glare from across the table. He had miscalculated, thinking the board would automatically side with him over me. He didn't understand that power dynamics had shifted. Results spoke louder than old loyalties now. As I presented our international growth numbers, I watched realization dawn on the board members' faces. The strategy was working. We were expanding into markets that had previously been closed to us. Innovation was accelerating. Profits were rising. After the meeting, Chairman Griffith pulled me aside. That was an impressive presentation. Thank you. He hesitated, then added, I want you to know that not everyone on the board supported Landon's concerns. Some of us recognize the value you bring. I smiled politely. Actions speak louder than words, Chairman. I'll be watching to see who truly supports progress at Emerald. Walking back to my office, I passed Landon in the hallway. He didn't meet my eyes. Good. Let him stew in his failure. But I knew this wasn't over. He was too invested in the old power structure to surrender without a fight, and I had to be prepared for whatever came next. That preparation came in the form of Delia, a former colleague who had left Emerald 2 years earlier after being passed over for promotion in favor of a less qualified man. She now worked at the Chicago Tribune as an investigative reporter focusing on corporate culture. We met for coffee at a small shop far from the office. So, she said after we'd exchanged pleasantries, you wanted to talk about Emerald? I wanted to talk about accountability, I corrected. About what happens when companies promise change but don't follow through. Her eyes lit up with interest. Are you saying Emerald's recent diversity initiatives are just for show? I'm saying progress is fragile. Some people are actively trying to undermine it, and I need insurance. What kind of insurance? I slid a folder across the table. Everything in here is documented and verified. I'm not asking you to publish it now. But if things go sideways, I want someone outside the company to have this information. Delia opened the folder and skimmed its contents, her eyes widening. This is explosive, systemic discrimination, falsified reports, retaliatory actions. You've been building this case for years. Since my first month at Emerald, I confirmed. I hoped I'd never need to use it. She looked up at me. And now? Now I'm not so sure. Things are changing, but change brings resistance. I need to protect what we've built. Delia nodded slowly, understanding exactly what I was asking. I'll keep this safe. If you ever give the word, I'll make sure the whole story comes out. Thank you. As I walked back to the office, I felt both relief and sadness. I didn't want to expose Emerald's dirty laundry to the world. Despite everything, I believed in the company's potential. But I also knew that real change sometimes requires the threat of consequences. The weeks that followed were deceptively quiet. Landon maintained a professional distance, speaking to me only when necessary. Preston had disappeared, his social media accounts gone dark. The Scholarship Foundation for Women in Engineering was gaining momentum, with applications pouring in from talented girls across the country. On the surface, everything was going according to plan, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the calm. That feeling was confirmed when Imani, the product manager I had supported in the executive meeting, asked to speak with me privately. There's something you should know, she said, closing my office door behind her. Landon has been meeting with board members individually, off-site, unofficial meetings. Do you know what they're discussing? She hesitated. Not exactly, but Janine from his administrative team overheard him on the phone. He said something about conflict of interest and foreign influence concerns. My stomach tightened. He was trying to build a coalition against me. Thank you for telling me, I said. Keep your ears open, but be careful. I don't want anyone else targeted. After she left, I stared out my window at the Chicago skyline. The afternoon sun glinted off glass and steel, transforming the city into a landscape of light and shadow. I had come so far, created so much change. I couldn't let Landon destroy it all because his ego couldn't handle a new world order. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Sheikh Tarek. Vice Minister, he greeted me. his voice unusually grave. I've received some concerning information about Emerald Energy that I wanted to discuss with you directly. What kind of information? I asked, though I already suspected. Someone sent our ministry documents suggesting you have been misrepresenting Emerald's capabilities and that the company is planning to withdraw from certain commitments in our agreement. Let me guess. These documents came without a name attached. Correct. Anonymous, but detailed, including financial projections that appear legitimate. They're falsified, I said firmly. Just like the reports Preston altered, this is an attempt to undermine our partnership. I suspected as much, which is why I'm calling you directly. But the ministry is concerned. We've invested significantly based on your recommendations. I understand. Can you forward me these documents? I'll prove they're fabricated. After we hung up, I sat in my darkened apartment, the city lights creating patterns across my living room floor. So this was Landon's play, not just to discredit me internally, but to destroy the very partnership that had elevated me. He was willing to sabotage a multi-million-dollar deal just to prove I didn't belong. The documents arrived in my email 10 minutes later. As I reviewed them, my anger turned to cold determination. The projections were clever forgeries, close enough to our actual numbers to seem plausible, but manipulated to show gradual failure of the initiative I was leading. I immediately called our finance director, Ellis, who I knew would still be working late. I need you to verify something for me, I said when he answered. Someone has falsified financial projections and sent them to our Saudi partners. Send them over, he said without hesitation. Ellis was one of the good ones, a brilliant financial mind who judged people solely on their competence. 20 minutes later, he called back. These are definitely fake. Whoever did this had access to our actual projections but modified key variables to show declining returns. It's subtle but undeniable. Can you document the discrepancies? I need irrefutable proof. Already working on it. I'll have it to you by morning. Thank you, Ellis. Aaliyah, he said before hanging up, whoever did this is playing with fire. This could constitute fraud. I know exactly who did it, I replied. And tomorrow, he's going to learn what happens when you play with fire. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. I needed time to prepare. Ellis had sent his analysis at 2 a.m., a meticulous breakdown of the falsified projections with clear evidence of manipulation. I printed copies and placed them in folders, then sent a message to Chairman Griffith requesting an emergency meeting with the executive team. Matter of urgent importance regarding our Saudi partnership. I wrote, all leadership required. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. As executives filed into the conference room, I noticed Landon's confident stride. He thought he was winning. He had no idea what was coming. Thank you all for coming on short notice. I began once everyone was seated. Yesterday evening, I received disturbing information. Someone from Emerald sent falsified financial projections to our Saudi partners, suggesting our joint initiative is failing. Murmurs of concern filled the room. Landon's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. Fortunately, I continued, Sheikh Tariq contacted me directly to verify the information. Our finance team has confirmed these projections are forgeries. I distributed the folders. The evidence is before you. As the executives reviewed Ellis's analysis, the atmosphere in the room darkened. This is a serious breach, Chairman Griffith said. If our partners had believed these projections, we could have lost the entire contract. Exactly, I agreed. And I believe I know who's responsible. All eyes turned to me. This was the moment of truth. For months, there has been a systematic attempt to undermine both this partnership and my position. First, with altered reports, now with falsified projections. The pattern is clear. I looked directly at Landon. Would you like to explain yourself, or shall I continue? His face drained of color. You're accusing me? Based on what evidence? The documents were sent from an anonymous email account. I said, but they were created on a company computer. Ellis traced the digital signature. Would you like to guess whose computer it was? Landon's eyes darted around the room looking for allies, finding none. This is absurd. I've been nothing but supportive of our international initiatives. while simultaneously meeting with board members off-site to raise concerns about foreign influence? I asked, while attempting to frame me as having divided loyalties. Chairman Griffith turned to Landon. Is this true? Have you been lobbying against Aaliyah behind the board's back? Landon straightened his tie, buying time. I've expressed legitimate concerns about potential conflicts of interest. That's my job as division head. And the falsified projections? I pressed. Were those also part of your job? I had nothing to do with any falsified documents, he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. I slid a final piece of paper across the table to Chairman Griffith. This is an IT report showing that the documents were created on Landon's company laptop at 7:43 p.m. last Tuesday. He then transferred them to a flash drive, presumably to send from an untraceable account. The room fell silent. Landon's face contorted with rage and desperation. You set me up, he hissed. You planted those files. That would be quite a feat, I replied calmly, considering I was in a video conference with the ministry at that exact time. 20 people can verify my whereabouts. Chairman Griffith stood. Landon, please wait in my office. The rest of you are dismissed except for Aaliyah. As the room cleared, I remained seated, my heart pounding despite my outward calm. Once we were alone, Chairman Griffith sat heavily in the chair next to mine. You've been anticipating this, he said. It wasn't a question. I've been documenting patterns of behavior since I started at this company, I corrected. Self-preservation becomes instinct when you're constantly undermined. He nodded slowly. What do you want to happen now? An interesting question. Not what would happen to Landon, but what I wanted. The chairman was giving me power over Landon's fate. If you've ever wondered what true revenge feels like, it's not the hot rush of anger. It's not watching someone suffer. It's this moment when the person who tried to diminish you is suddenly at your mercy. When you get to decide what justice looks like. I considered the question carefully. The simplest answer would be to demand Landon's termination. He had committed corporate espionage, attempted to sabotage a major partnership, and systematically undermined me and other women. By any standard, these were fireable offenses. But firing him would be too easy, too clean. It would remove the problem without addressing the system that created him. I want structural change, I said finally. Landon should face consequences, yes, but firing him just creates a vacancy that could be filled by someone with the same attitudes. Chairman Griffith leaned forward, intrigued. What exactly are you proposing? First, Landon steps down as division head, effective immediately. He nodded. Given the evidence, that's inevitable. Second, we restructure leadership across all divisions. Every team must have diverse representation, not just in numbers, but in actual decision-making authority. That's more challenging, but doable. Third, we implement transparent pay structures and promotion criteria. No more subjective evaluations that favor those who look and think like the existing leadership. He winced slightly at this one. The board will push back. Let them. Fourth, we expand the scholarship foundation to include mentorship programs and guaranteed internships. We don't just bring diverse talent in, we make sure they can succeed. And Landon specifically? He asked. Here was the real question. What did I want for the man who had tried so hard to diminish me? Landon stays with the company, I said, surprising even myself. But he reports to me, and he becomes the executive sponsor of our diversity initiatives. Chairman Griffith's eyebrows shot up. You want him to champion the very changes he's been resisting? Exactly. His redemption, if he chooses it, will be to actively dismantle the system he benefited from. He'll learn what it means to advocate for those with less power. Or he'll resign rather than do so, which will be its own statement. A slow smile spread across the chairman's face. That's elegantly brutal. It's not about brutality, I corrected. It's about transformation. Landon isn't the disease, he's a symptom. I want to treat the underlying condition. Chairman Griffith stood and extended his hand. I'll take your proposal to the board this afternoon. Given the alternatives, losing our Saudi partnership or facing potential fraud charges, I think they'll be receptive. As I shook his hand, I felt no triumph, no vindictive pleasure, just a quiet certainty that this was the right path forward. Later that day, I sat in my office waiting for the board's decision when there was a knock at my door. To my surprise, it was Landon. His usual polished appearance had crumbled. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly disheveled. The armor of confidence he typically wore had cracked, revealing the frightened man beneath. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual authoritative edge. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat, avoiding my eyes. "The chairman told me your proposal," he said after a long silence. "Why?" "Why what? Why not just have me fired? That's what I would have done in your position." "I know," I replied simply. "That's the difference between us." He looked up, confusion evident in his expression. "I don't understand." "You see power as something to be hoarded and protected. I see it as something to be distributed and shared." "That's naive," he scoffed, a hint of his old arrogance returning. "Business isn't about sharing power." "And how has your approach worked out for you?" I asked. "Here you sit, demoted, disgraced, at the mercy of someone you tried to destroy. Was it worth it?" He flinched as if I'd struck him. "You have no idea what it's like to..." "To what? To work twice as hard for half the recognition? To have your ideas stolen? To be undermined at every turn? You're right. I have no idea what that's like." My voice remained calm, but the words landed precisely. Landon fell silent, unable to meet my gaze. "You have a choice now," I continued. "You can resign and find another company where you can continue your old patterns. Or you can stay and be part of something better. Something that will outlast both of us. And if I stay, you'll use this position to humiliate me. No, I'll expect you to do your job, championing diversity and inclusion initiatives with the same energy you once used to undermine them. Your success will be measured by the success of others, particularly those who don't look like you." He shook his head slowly. "I don't know if I can do that." "Then you've already made your choice," I said, turning back to my computer, dismissing him. But he didn't rise to leave. Instead, he sat there, seemingly wrestling with himself. "What if?" he began, then stopped. Started again. "What if I don't know how?" The vulnerability in the question surprised me. I looked at him more carefully and saw something I hadn't expected. Not just fear of losing status, but genuine uncertainty. "Then you learn," I said, my tone softening slightly. "You listen more than you speak. You recognize that your experience isn't universal. You use your privilege to create space for others rather than to claim more for yourself." He nodded slowly. I need to think." "Take the weekend," I said. "Let me know your decision on Monday." After he left, I exhaled deeply, releasing tension I hadn't realized I was holding. Whatever Landon decided, things were already changing. The board approved all my proposals that afternoon, with only 2 dissenting votes. The restructuring would begin immediately. On Monday morning, I arrived to find Landon waiting outside my office, impeccably dressed and holding a thick folder. "I'm staying," he said without preamble, "and I spent the weekend researching best practices for corporate diversity initiatives. These are my initial thoughts." He held out the folder. I took it, not bothering to hide my surprise. "This doesn't mean I've suddenly changed who I am," he added quickly, "but I'm willing to learn." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a transformation, but it was a beginning. Over the next few months, Emerald Energy Solutions became a case study in corporate evolution. The restructuring created opportunities for overlooked talent to rise. The transparent promotion criteria eliminated much of the subjective decision-making that had disadvantaged women and minorities. The mentorship programs connected promising students with leaders across the industry. And Landon? He surprised everyone, including himself. Once he redirected his ambition toward measurable diversity goals, he applied the same relentless drive that had fueled his rise. He wasn't perfect. He still stumbled, still had blind spots. But he was trying, genuinely trying, to understand perspectives different from his own. 6 months after our confrontation, we launched a major initiative together, a partnership with 5 universities to create renewable energy programs with diverse faculty and student bodies. As we stood on stage at the announcement, A reporter asked Landon how it felt to champion such progressive programs. "It's been educational," he said, with unexpected candor. "I've had to unlearn as much as I've had to learn, but the results speak for themselves. Our teams are stronger, more innovative, and more successful than ever before." Later, at the reception, he approached me with 2 glasses of sparkling water. "The sheikh just told me our partnership is expanding to 3 additional countries," he said, handing me a glass. "He specifically mentioned your leadership as the deciding factor." "The whole team deserves credit," I replied. "Yes, but it wouldn't have happened without you." He hesitated, then added, "I wouldn't be here without you either." "Planning to thank me for not destroying your career?" I asked, only half joking. "No," he said seriously. "I'm acknowledging that you saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. The capacity to change." I studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity. Found none. "Everyone has that capacity," I said. "Few choose to use it." "Why did you choose to change things rather than just advance yourself?" The question made me think of my grandmother, of my mother, of all the women who had come before me, creating paths where none existed. "Because success means nothing if you're the only one who achieves it," I said finally. "Real victory isn't reaching the top alone. It's bringing others with you, especially those who've been kept from even approaching the ladder." A year after the confrontation with Landon, I received a call from Sheikh Tariq. "Vice Minister," he greeted me warmly, "I have a proposition for you." He explained that the ministry was creating a new international consortium focused on renewable energy implementation in developing nations. They wanted me to lead it. "The position would require you to leave Emerald," he said, "but your impact would be global." I looked around my office at Emerald. So much had changed. The company now regularly appeared on lists of best workplaces for women and minorities. The Scholarship Foundation had supported 50 young women entering engineering programs. Our executive team had achieved gender parity. My work here wasn't finished. Meaningful change never is, but the momentum was established. Systems were in place to continue progress. Perhaps it was time for a new challenge. I accepted Sheikh Tariq's offer, with one condition: that Emerald would be a founding partner in the consortium. My worlds would remain connected, the bridge I had built remaining intact. When I announced my departure, the response was bittersweet. Celebration of my opportunity mixed with genuine regret at my leaving. The company organized a farewell reception that was attended by everyone from board members to maintenance staff. Imani, now a senior director, hugged me tightly. "You changed everything," she whispered. "We won't go back to the way it was." "Make sure of it," I replied. "The work continues, with or without me." As I made my rounds, saying goodbyes, I found Landon standing near the windows, looking out at the city. "So," he said as I approached, "you're leaving us behind." "Not behind," I corrected. "Alongside. The consortium will work closely with Emerald." He nodded, then turned to face me fully. "I never properly thanked you." "For what?" "For not doing to me what I would have done to you. For seeing possibility instead of just punishment." "Don't make me regret it," I said, but I was smiling. "I won't." He extended his hand. "Good luck, Vice Minister." As I shook his hand, I realized how far we'd both come from that moment when he'd whispered, "Women like you belong in reception." He had been wrong about me, about women, about leadership. And he had learned from his wrongness, perhaps the most valuable skill anyone can develop. My last day at Emerald, I cleared out my office and took a final walk through the building. In the lobby, I paused to look at the newly installed wall, recognizing the scholarship recipients, dozens of young women who would shape the future of renewable energy. My grandmother's name was inscribed above them all, honoring her sacrifice and vision. As I stepped outside into the bright Chicago day, I felt no regret, no unfinished business. My revenge hadn't been destroying Landon or even humiliating him. It had been creating a world where future generations of women wouldn't need revenge at all, where their talents would be recognized, their voices heard, their leadership valued. The true victory wasn't in tearing down, but in building up, not in closing doors, but in opening them wider than they'd ever been before. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told you don't belong, remember this. Your response doesn't have to be destruction. It can be creation. You can build something so undeniably valuable that those who dismissed you must either adapt or be left behind. That's not just revenge, it's revolution. And it starts with refusing to be invisible. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like and subscribe. There are so many more stories of transformation waiting to be told, of people who turned obstacles into opportunities, who refused to accept the limitations others placed on them. Your support ensures these stories reach those who need to hear them most. And remember, the most powerful response to being underestimated isn't anger, it's excellence. The resume struck my cheek, pages scattering across the polished floor like autumn leaves in a storm. The staple caught my skin, leaving a tiny scratch that stung less than his words. "This is garbage," he announced, his voice echoing through the conference room where 5 other executives sat in uncomfortable silence. "Try harder next time." Nolan Keswick, heir to his father's financial empire, stood over me with the smug confidence of someone who'd never earned anything in his life. 28 years old, same age as me, worlds apart in privilege. My face burned as I knelt to gather my credentials. My economics degree from a state university. My financial certifications earned through night classes while working full-time. The market prediction methodology I'd developed that had outperformed standard models by 17% over 3 years. All dismissed as garbage by someone who'd been gifted a corner office because of his last name. "Thank you for your time," I managed to say, though my voice trembled. The weight of 10 eyes on my back made each step toward the door feel like wading through concrete. In the elevator, I finally exhaled, clutching my papers to my chest. I'd spent weeks preparing for this interview, believing my innovations could benefit this prestigious firm. Instead, I received a public execution. Walking out of that gleaming skyscraper, I made a silent promise to myself. This moment wouldn't define me. It would arm me. Before I tell you what happened next, can I ask you something? Have you ever noticed how many people watch these stories but never hit like or subscribe? If you're enjoying this journey so far, take a second to support the channel. Because trust me, you'll want to be notified when the next chapter of someone's revenge drops. Now, back to my story. My name is Ellery Nightingale. Not the name my parents gave me, but the one I chose when I realized this world rewards memorable impressions. I grew up in a small apartment above my grandmother's bookstore, raised on equal parts literature and practicality. "Numbers tell stories too," she'd say, teaching me to track inventory and calculate profits before I learned multiplication in school. By 16, I was managing the store's finances. By 20, I'd earned a scholarship to study economics. And by 25, I'd developed a market prediction system that incorporated variables most traditional models ignored: cultural trends, political undercurrents, and psychological patterns in consumer behavior. For 3 years, I'd refined this methodology at Waterstone Financial, a smaller firm that took a chance on me when larger companies wouldn't look past my lack of Ivy League credentials. My approach wasn't conventional, but my results spoke volumes. I consistently predicted market shifts weeks before they occurred, which is why I believed Keswick Financial Advisory Group might see my value. I was wrong. The day after my humiliation, I returned to my desk at Waterstone with new determination. My boss, Theodora Waterstone, a 60-year-old woman who'd built her company from nothing, noticed something different about me. "What happened?" she asked, leaning against my cubicle. I told her everything. The interview, the resume thrown in my face, the burning shame. When I finished, Theodora didn't offer sympathy. Instead, she pulled up a chair. "Ellery, do you know why I hired you when your credentials were still fresh ink?" I shook my head. "Because you see patterns others miss. That's rare and valuable." She tapped my computer screen. "Show me again how your system works." For the next hour, I walked her through my methodology, how I tracked seemingly unrelated data points, how I'd built algorithms that identified connections between market behavior and human psychology, how I could predict not just what would happen, but why. When I finished, Theodora was silent for a long moment. I'm promoting you, she finally said. Head of market analysis. You'll have a team, a budget, and a mission. Make this methodology bulletproof. Why now? I asked. Her eyes narrowed. Because sometimes, the best motivation comes from proving someone wrong. The next 18 months transformed everything. My team grew from 2 people to 12. My methodology became more sophisticated, more accurate. When an unexpected market downturn hit the financial sector, our clients remained protected while others hemorrhaged money. Major clients began to notice. Then they began to switch to us. Industry publications wrote about the anonymous analyst revolutionizing financial forecasting. I remained unnamed in these pieces, my choice. I wasn't ready to step into the spotlight. Not yet. Theodora understood my strategy. You're building mystique, she said. Smart. What I was actually building was a reputation that would travel ahead of my name. When the time came, I wanted the work to speak for itself. Then came the tremor no one saw coming. A seemingly stable foreign market collapsed overnight. Banks that had heavily invested began to fail. Financial institutions worldwide faced massive losses as the contagion spread. Everyone was caught off guard. Except us. 3 months earlier, my system had detected subtle warning signs. Unusual trading patterns. Small but significant shifts in currency values. Political appointments that changed regulatory priorities. We'd moved our clients' investments to safer positions. While other firms watched their clients lose millions, ours remained secure. That's when the financial world really started talking about Waterstone's mysterious market profit. Who was this person who had seen what armies of analysts at major firms had missed? The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was reviewing data with my team when Theodora appeared at the door, her expression unreadable. My office, she said. Now. I followed her, wondering what crisis had emerged. Inside, she closed the door and handed me her phone. Someone wants to speak with you. I took the phone cautiously. This is Ellery Nightingale. Ms. Nightingale. The deep voice on the other end sounded strained. This is Preston Keswick. My heart skipped. Preston Keswick, founder and CEO of Keswick Financial Advisory Group, Nolan's father. We've lost $30 million, he continued without preamble. Our analysts missed something crucial in this market collapse. Everyone says you're the only person who can help us understand what happened and prevent further damage. He didn't recognize my voice. Why would he? He hadn't been in the room when his son humiliated me. I caught Theodora's eye. She nodded slightly. I'll need to see your data, I said, keeping my voice neutral. All of it. Of course. Anything. The desperation in his voice was palpable. Can you come to our offices this afternoon? I'll be there at 3, I replied, then handed the phone back to Theodora. After she ended the call, she studied me carefully. You're going to help them? I nodded slowly. I'm going to help them understand exactly what they missed. The elevator ride up to Keswick's offices felt different this time. 18 months ago, I'd arrived hopeful, clutching a resume that represented years of hard work. Today, I arrived with Theodora beside me, and power shifting invisibly into my hands. The receptionist led us to their main conference room, the same one where Nolan had thrown my resume in my face. The irony wasn't lost on me. Inside waited Preston Keswick, 3 board members, and a team of analysts. They stood when we entered, faces drawn with worry. Ms. Waterstone, Preston greeted Theodora, then looked past her expectantly. Where's your expert? You're looking at her, Theodora replied, gesturing to me. Confusion flashed across Preston's face. Ms. Nightingale? But you're... The analyst who predicted the collapse. I finished for him. Yes. Recognition dawned slowly on the faces of 2 executives who'd been present during my interview. Their discomfort was visible as they realized who I was. The door opened behind us, and Nolan Keswick strode in, carrying a tablet and looking harried. He glanced at me without recognition, then did a double take. His composed facade crumbled as memory clicked into place. You, he said, the single word carrying both accusation and disbelief. I smiled. Me. Preston looked between us. You 2 know each other? Before Nolan could speak, I answered. Your son interviewed me for an analyst position 18 months ago. He found my resume lacking. The atmosphere in the room thickened with tension. Well, Preston said, clearly uncomfortable but too desperate to dwell on it. We're grateful you're here now. We need to understand what happened. Show me your data, I said. For the next hour, I reviewed their analysis. The errors became immediately apparent. They'd relied on traditional models that ignored crucial indicators, exactly the kind my methodology was designed to catch. I stood at the head of the table, where once I'd been deemed unworthy, and laid out exactly what they'd missed, the subtle market indicators they'd overlooked, the connection points their analysts had failed to make. Your 30 million loss could have been prevented, I concluded. But that's not your biggest problem. Based on my analysis, you stand to lose another 90 million if you don't implement specific changes immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. Preston Keswick looked shell-shocked. How certain are you? 97%, I replied without hesitation. He exchanged glances with the board members, then turned to me. Name your price. We need you. This was the moment I'd been preparing for since that day. I gathered my scattered resume from the floor. I could feel Nolan's eyes on me, a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. I smiled. I'm not for sale. Keswick's face fell. But, I continued, I'll consult on one condition. Anything, he said quickly. My condition surprised everyone. I'll solve your crisis. But afterward, I want 15 minutes to present my resume to your board. Your son will sit through it, without interruption. Nolan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. That's ridiculous. We don't have time for… Done, Preston cut him off. Now tell us how to stop the bleeding. Wait, you're still here? Good. Most people would have clicked away by now, missing the best part of the story. If you're invested in what happens next, make sure you're subscribed. Because the revenge I'm about to describe, it's the kind that changes lives forever. Let me show you how I dismantled an empire with nothing but truth. For the next week, I worked closely with Keswick's team, implementing the changes needed to protect their remaining assets. I was professional, thorough, and completely focused on the task at hand. If anyone noticed how I avoided being alone with Nolan, they didn't mention it. During this time, I observed the company culture from the inside. The nepotism was worse than I'd imagined. Qualified people were routinely passed over for promotions in favor of those with connections. Innovative ideas were squashed if they came from the wrong people. And Nolan Keswick was at the center of it all. A mediocre analyst with extraordinary power, making decisions that affected millions of dollars and dozens of careers. What Preston Keswick didn't know, what no one knew, was that during those 18 months after my rejection, I had been doing more than refining my methodology. I'd been watching Keswick Financial Advisory Group carefully, tracking their decisions, their failures, their stock price. And when their stock dipped following several poor quarters, I began quietly acquiring shares. Not enough to trigger any regulatory disclosures, but enough to gain a minor yet significant voting position when combined with others who shared my concerns about the company's direction. I had also been building relationships with their 3 largest institutional investors, providing them, through intermediaries, with insights that helped protect their investments in other areas. They didn't know me personally, but they knew my work, and they trusted it. The day came for my 15-minute presentation to the board. Thanks to my help, Keswick Financial had avoided the additional losses I'd predicted. They'd even begun to recover some of their position in the market. Preston Keswick was in a much better mood than when we'd first met. The floor is yours, Ms. Nightingale, he said as the board members settled around the table, though I'm not sure why you wanted this formality. Nolan sat as far from me as possible, his expression a mixture of boredom and disdain. I connected my laptop to the projection system, but instead of displaying my resume, I pulled up a series of graphs. This first chart shows Keswick Financial's performance over the past 5 years. I began. The red marks indicate major investment decisions made under Nolan Keswick's direction. The board members leaned forward, suddenly more interested. As you can see, 84% of these decisions resulted in performances below market average. 26% resulted in significant losses. Nolan straightened in his chair. What is this? This isn't your resume. On the contrary, I replied calmly. This is exactly what my resume demonstrates. The ability to analyze data and identify problems. And right now, the data shows that the single biggest threat to this company's future is sitting at this table. Preston Keswick's face darkened. Ms. Nightingale, we agreed. To let me present my resume without interruption. I finished for him. I'm doing exactly that. My resume is built on identifying patterns others miss. And I've identified a pattern here that's costing you millions. I advanced to the next slide, which compared the performance of departments under Nolan's supervision against industry benchmarks. The numbers were damning. This isn't personal, I continued, though we all knew it was, at least partly. This is mathematical. Your company is underperforming because key decisions are made based on relationships rather than expertise. The room had grown very quiet. I could feel the weight of every eye on me. I'm not just showing you a problem, I said, advancing to my final slide. I'm offering a solution. The screen displayed my proposal. A restructuring of their executive team based on merit rather than tenure or connection. A new risk assessment protocol using my methodology. And a governance structure that would prevent any single person, no matter their last name, from making unchecked decisions. You asked my price for saving your company from losing $90 million? I said, looking directly at Preston. This is it. Implement these changes or watch your company continue its decline. One of the board members, an older woman I recognized as a former Securities and Exchange Commission chair, spoke up. What gives you the authority to demand such changes? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. 3 things, I answered. First, my track record of accurate predictions, which your CEO has already acknowledged. Second, my position as a shareholder with voting rights. This revelation caused several surprised looks around the table. And third, I continued, the support of your 3 largest institutional investors, who have reviewed my proposal and agree with my assessment. I let that sink in before delivering the final blow. They've authorized me to inform you that if these changes aren't implemented, they're prepared to call for a vote of no confidence in current management at the next shareholder meeting. The silence that followed was absolute. Preston Keswick looked as though he'd been struck. Nolan's face had drained of all color. The board member who had questioned me nodded slowly. I move, we discuss Ms. Nightingale's proposal immediately. Second, another board member quickly added. I gathered my things. I'll leave you to your discussion. You have my contact information when you reach a decision. As I walked toward the door, Preston Keswick found his voice. Wait, you've been planning this all along? I paused with my hand on the doorknob and looked back at the table of powerful people who now hung on my every word. From the moment your son threw my resume in my face and called it garbage, I replied evenly. I decided then that someday I'd show him exactly what he missed. I left them to decide their fate, knowing what the outcome would be. The numbers were on my side. They always had been. 3 days later, I received the call I'd been expecting. The board has voted, Preston Keswick said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. They've accepted your proposal. All of it. I allowed myself a moment to savor the victory. I'm glad to hear it. They've also asked me to offer you a position, he continued. Head of Risk Assessment and Market Strategy. You'd report directly to the board. Now this was unexpected. I'd anticipated consulting work, not a permanent role. What about Nolan? I asked, unable to resist. There was a pause. My son will be reassigned to a more appropriate position given his abilities. Translation, demoted. I'll need to think about it, I replied, though I already knew my answer. I'll get back to you tomorrow. That evening, I sat with Theodora on the rooftop patio of her brownstone, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of amber and gold. I'd told her everything. So what will you do? She asked, swirling a glass of bourbon. If I take the position, I could transform their entire approach, implement my methodology across all their divisions. The impact would be massive, she finished for me. But that's not what I'm asking. What do you want, Ellery? The question hung in the air between us. What did I want? Revenge? I'd already achieved that. Power? I'd proven I could acquire it. Recognition? The financial world was already whispering my name. I want to matter, I finally said. I want my work to matter. Theodora nodded slowly. Then you have your answer. The next morning, I called Preston Keswick. I'll accept the position, I said, with 3 conditions. Name them, he replied, eager to close the deal. First, I want to bring 2 analysts from my current team. Second, I want complete autonomy over the risk assessment methodology. And third, I paused, making sure my words would land with precision. I want Nolan to work directly under me for the first 6 months. There was a long silence. That last condition might be difficult. It's non-negotiable, I replied calmly. If he's going to remain at this company in any capacity, he needs to understand the methodology that saved it. Who better to teach him than me? Another pause. I'll speak with him. No, I said firmly. This isn't a negotiation between you and your son. This is a business decision between you and your new head of risk assessment. If the board doesn't agree to all 3 conditions, I walk. 2 hours later, he called back. The board accepts your conditions, all of them. And that's how, 4 weeks after saving Keswick Financial from disaster, I walked into their headquarters as their new head of risk assessment and market strategy. My office, larger than Nolan's had been, overlooked the city from the 40-twond floor. On my desk sat a potted plant with a card from the board. Thank you for your vision. My first order of business was a company-wide meeting to introduce the new risk assessment protocols. Every employee from entry-level analysts to senior executives attended, either in person or remotely. I stood at the podium, surveying the sea of faces, some curious, some hostile, some cautiously optimistic. At the back of the room stood Nolan, arms crossed, expression unreadable. For too long, I began, this company has relied on outdated models that fail to capture the full complexity of today's markets. That ends today. For the next hour, I outlined my methodology in clear, accessible terms, how it incorporated non-traditional variables, how it had predicted market shifts that conventional models missed, how it would transform their approach to risk. This isn't just about avoiding losses, I concluded. It's about seeing opportunities others miss. It's about understanding the stories numbers tell when you know how to listen. The room erupted in applause, tentative at first, then growing more confident. I could see excitement building among the analysts who had been starved for innovation. Implementation begins immediately, I announced. Department heads will receive detailed briefs this afternoon. Training starts tomorrow. As people filed out, many stopped to introduce themselves or ask questions. I made eye contact with each one, memorizing names, noting who seemed resistant and who seemed eager. Nolan remained at the back of the room, watching. When the last person had left, he approached. Impressive performance, he said, his tone suggesting anything but admiration. The board seems convinced you're some kind of prophet. I smiled. Not a prophet, just someone who pays attention to details others dismiss. His jaw tightened. So what exactly do you expect me to do as your subordinate? Learn, I replied simply. Starting tomorrow, 8 a.m., my office. The next morning, Nolan arrived at 8:15. I was waiting. You're late, I said without looking up from my computer. I had a breakfast meeting with a client, he replied, dropping into the chair across from my desk. I finally looked at him. No, you didn't. You had coffee alone at the shop downstairs, then deliberately waited 15 minutes before coming up. Don't lie to me again. His eyes widened slightly. How did you? The cup in your hand is from the downstairs cafe. The sleeve has today's date stamped on it, and you have a habit of using imaginary client meetings as excuses. You've done it 17 times in the past year, according to your calendar and the visitor logs. I pushed a folder across the desk. This is your first assignment. A complete analysis of the Meridian market collapse using traditional models. Tomorrow, you'll redo the analysis using our new methodology. Then we'll compare results. He didn't touch the folder. This is beneath me. No, I corrected him. Until now, you've been beneath it. Actual analysis requires attention to detail and intellectual honesty, two qualities you've never bothered to develop because you didn't have to. Your name got you through doors, but it won't do the work for you. His face flushed with anger. You're enjoying this, aren't you? This is your revenge for that interview. I leaned forward. Let me be absolutely clear. If revenge was my goal, you wouldn't be sitting in that chair. You'd be cleaning out your desk while security watched. The fact that you're still employed isn't about my mercy. It's about your potential usefulness. Usefulness? He repeated. Yes. Despite your lack of analytical skill, you have relationships with clients. You understand the company culture. You know where the bodies are buried, so to speak. That information has value. I tapped the folder. Now take this and get to work. I expect a preliminary report by 4 p.m. Wait, you're still with me? Perfect. Most people don't have the patience to hear how true power works. It's not about quick satisfaction. It's about transforming the entire game. If you're invested in seeing how I completely rebuilt this company in my image, hit subscribe now. The most satisfying part of revenge isn't the fall of your enemy, it's rising so far above them that they become irrelevant. The weeks that followed established a new order at Keswick Financial. My methodology was implemented across all divisions and results came quickly. Market predictions proved accurate. Client confidence returned. The company's stock began to climb. I worked 14-hour days, learning every aspect of the business, identifying weaknesses, rebuilding from the foundation up. I hired based on skill rather than connections. I promoted those who demonstrated insight, regardless of their background. And I watched Nolan Keswick closely. To my surprise, he actually did the work I assigned. His first analysis was sloppy and incomplete, but he'd made an effort. Each subsequent assignment showed marginal improvement. One evening, about 2 months into my tenure, I found him still at his desk at 9 p.m., surrounded by printouts and market reports. You're here late, I observed, stopping by his cubicle. I'd moved him from his corner office to the analyst bullpen, a demotion that had sparked weeks of office gossip. He looked up, dark circles under his eyes, trying to understand this correlation pattern. It doesn't follow any model I'm familiar with. I glanced at his work. That's because it's not following a traditional pattern. Look at these 3 indicators together, not separately. I spent the next 20 minutes walking him through the analysis. He asked intelligent questions, perhaps the first truly thoughtful questions I'd heard from him. As I turned to leave, he spoke again. Why are you helping me? I considered the question carefully. Because potential without discipline is worthless. You have the former. I'm forcing you to develop the latter. You still hate me, he stated. I don't hate you, I replied honestly. I nothing you. You're a variable in an equation I'm solving. 2 more months passed. The quarterly board meeting approached, my first chance to present comprehensive results to the full board and major shareholders. The preparation was intense, with teams working around the clock to compile data and create presentations. Through it all, Nolan continued to improve. He wasn't brilliant, but he was becoming competent, thorough, occasionally even insightful. He'd stopped arriving late, stopped making excuses, started asking questions rather than making assumptions. The morning of the board meeting, I found a report on my desk, a detailed analysis of emerging risks in an Asian market we'd been considering for expansion. The work was solid, thorough, not revolutionary, but completely competent. The name on the report, Nolan Keswick. I sent him a message. See me. When he arrived at my office, I held up his report. Did you do this yourself? Yes, he said, standing straighter. Every part of it. It's good work, I acknowledged. Which is why I'm confused. The timestamp shows you completed it at 2 a.m., but it wasn't requested. Nobody assigned this to you. He shifted slightly. I noticed the indicators while working on something else. They matched a pattern you'd shown me last month. I thought it might be important. I studied him. You did this voluntarily. Yes. Why? He seemed to struggle with the answer. Because it needed doing. Because I saw something others might miss. For the first time since I'd known him, Nolan Keswick looked like an actual analyst rather than someone playing a role. You're presenting this to the board today, I decided. His eyes widened. What? No, I'm not prepared to. If you did the work, you can explain it? I cut him off. This is what actual analysts do, Nolan. They find problems and solve them. Then they communicate their findings to decision makers. But the board will see that you've identified a significant risk that could save this company millions of dollars. I checked my watch. The meeting is at 11. You have 3 hours to prepare your presentation. He left my office looking shell-shocked. At the board meeting, I presented the quarterly results first. The numbers spoke for themselves. Our new methodology had transformed the company's performance, increasing accuracy and risk assessment by 31% and boosting client retention by 24%. When I finished, Preston Keswick was beaming. Remarkable work, Miss Nightingale. You've exceeded all expectations. Thank you, I replied. But today's most important insight comes from another analyst. Nolan Keswick has identified an emerging risk pattern that requires immediate attention. The surprise on Preston's face mirrored the expressions around the table. Nolan had been notably absent from board meetings since my arrival. Nolan stood and walked to the front of the room, visibly nervous but prepared. He connected his laptop and began presenting his findings, clearly, methodically, with none of the arrogant flourishes that had once characterized his communication. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. How confident are you in this assessment? One board member finally asked. Nolan glanced at me, then back to the board. Based on the methodology Ms. Nightingale has implemented, I'm 89% confident. The correlation patterns are consistent with previous market contractions in similar economies. And your recommendation? Another board member pressed. Immediate reduction of exposure in these specific sectors, Nolan replied. Reallocation to the alternative markets I've outlined on page 12. The board discussed his recommendation for 20 minutes before voting unanimously to approve it. As we left the meeting, Preston Keswick pulled his son aside. I couldn't hear what was said, but the expression on both their faces suggested something significant had passed between them. Later that afternoon, Preston came to my office. That was unexpected, he said, settling into the chair across from me. His work merited recognition, I replied neutrally. Preston studied me. 6 months ago, my son threw your resume in your face. Today, you gave him a platform in front of the board. I gave his work the platform it deserved, I corrected. The quality of his analysis earned that recognition, not his last name. You've transformed him, Preston said wonderingly. How? I haven't transformed him. I've simply created consequences for mediocrity and rewards for excellence. He's transforming himself in response to that environment. Preston nodded slowly. Your 6-month condition ends next week. What are your plans for Nolan after that? I'd been considering this question for some time. That depends on him. If he continues to produce quality work, he'll advance like anyone else, based on merit, not bloodline. And if he doesn't, then he'll remain exactly where he is until he earns something different. Preston stood to leave, then paused. You know, when you first presented your proposal to restructure our company, I thought it was about revenge. Now I see it was about something much more powerful. What's that? I asked. Justice, he replied. The kind that transforms rather than destroys. The following week marked exactly 6 months since I'd joined Keswick Financial. The company had been remade in ways few could have predicted. Accountability had replaced nepotism. Innovation had replaced tradition. Results had replaced rhetoric. And on a Friday afternoon, I found Nolan Keswick waiting outside my office. Do you have a minute? He asked. I gestured for him to enter. What can I do for you? He closed the door and stood awkwardly for a moment before speaking. Today marks 6 months. Yes, I acknowledged. It does. I've been thinking about that day. The interview. He looked directly at me. I've never actually apologized. No, I agreed. You haven't. He took a deep breath. I'm sorry. What I did was inexcusable. Throwing your resume. Calling it garbage. I was cruel because I could be. Because no one had ever held me accountable. I said nothing, waiting. The thing is, he continued, you were right. I didn't know how to do actual analysis until you forced me to learn. I didn't understand value until you showed me the cost of ignoring it. He placed a folder on my desk. This is my resignation. That surprised me. You're quitting? No, he said. I'm applying for the junior analyst position in your department, the proper way, with no special treatment. I opened the folder. Inside was a resume, not the glossy, credential-padded version he would have had before, but an honest accounting of his actual skills and experience. On top was a handwritten note, not garbage anymore, but still needs work. I looked up at him. Why? Because I want to earn my place, he said simply, and because I finally understand what you've been trying to teach me. I considered him for a long moment. The arrogant heir who had humiliated me was gone, replaced by someone humbled but not broken. Someone who had finally confronted his own mediocrity and chosen to overcome it rather than hide behind privilege. Application accepted, I said finally. You start Monday. New office, new responsibilities. Relief flooded his face. Thank you, I won't disappoint you. This isn't about disappointing me, I replied. It's about meeting the standard. The same standard everyone else has to meet. He nodded. I understand. As he turned to leave, I called after him. Nolan. He paused at the door. Your analysis last week saved this company approximately $22 million. That's the power of paying attention to details others dismiss. A small smile touched his lips. Like a resume from someone without the right connections? Exactly like that, I agreed. 6 months had transformed both of us. I'd arrived seeking revenge and discovered something far more satisfying. The power to rebuild something broken into something better. He'd arrived entitled and incompetent, and discovered the satisfaction of earning respect rather than demanding it. The following Monday, when Nolan arrived at his new desk in the analyst department, he found a framed document on his desk, the resume he'd thrown in my face 18 months earlier, now enclosed in glass with a small brass plate that read, "Where we begin is not where we end. The most powerful revenge isn't destroying your enemy. It's transforming the entire system that made them powerful in the first place. It's creating a world where merit matters more than names, where innovation outweighs tradition, where results speak louder than rhetoric. A world where someone can walk into a room carrying nothing but their ideas and change everything." If you've stayed with me through this entire story, you understand something crucial about true power. It's not about quick satisfaction. It's about lasting change. If this resonated with you, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every week, we share stories of people who transformed painful moments into powerful futures. And if you have your own story of rising above those who underestimated you, share it in the comments below. Your journey might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.